Today, we're going to dive into something pretty amazing. How a single book of poetry from post-war Taiwan ended up telling this hidden story about memory, identity, and, believe it or not, political power.
So let's just jump right in with the big question here. How can poetry, something that feels so personal and artistic, actually become a powerful political tool? How can it literally be used to shape the history of an entire nation?
Okay, so our journey starts right here with this book, Santai Shizhuan. Now, this was a big deal when it came out in Taiwan right after World War II. It was actually the first major work to really gather and talk about the island's classical poets from the Japanese colonial era.
And if you just glance at it, on the surface, it looks like a celebration of these Taiwanese poets who use their art to resist foreign rule. But the real story, the deeper meaning, isn't just in the poems themselves. It's in the guy who decided to tell their story in the first place.
And that brings us to the author, a man named Li Yushu. See, his own personal story is really the key that unlocks the book's hidden purpose. It's the first major clue in our investigation.
You've got to understand, Li Yushu's whole life was defined by this theme of loyalty to causes that were, already lost. He was born into the family of a Qing dynasty loyalist, so he kind of inherited this deep sense of displacement. And then, that feeling became intensely personal for him when the Chinese Civil War forced him to flee his own home and go to Taiwan in 1949. He was a man adrift.
So, this personal history, this feeling of loss and displacement, it gave Li Yushu a really powerful, really specific lens for how he saw the world and how he saw the poets he was writing about. And it all boils down to one single crucial concept.
And that concept is yimin. Now, this is such a powerful idea. It basically means a remnant person. Someone whose nation or dynasty has completely vanished, but their loyalty to that lost cause is still burning bright. And for Li Yushu, he saw this spirit everywhere.
Okay, to put this in a way we can all get, think about those super diehard sports fans, right? Their favorite team moves to another city, but do they start rooting for the new team? No way. They keep wearing their old jerseys, they tell stories about the glory days. That defiant loyalty to something that's gone, that is the feeling of yimin.
And this is exactly where we see Li Yushu's personal experience shaping the story. He very carefully picked out poems that just happened to echo his own yimin feelings. He spotlights lines like this one, which honestly reads less like a poem and more like a direct order. Don't assimilate. Remember who you are.
And this next line, it perfectly shows the narrative that Li Yushu was carefully constructing. The poet isn't just talking about politics, he's framing the whole thing as this deep, cultural struggle between us and them, the Han and the so-called barbarian. By choosing these specific poems, Li Yushu wasn't just collecting history, he was actively crafting a very particular version of it.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a loyalist author, right? And he's kind of projecting his own feelings onto these loyalist poets he's writing about. Makes sense. But here's the twist. Here's where it gets really, really interesting. This wasn't just some personal passion project. It turns out his book perfectly, and I mean perfectly, aligned with the political needs of the new government that had just arrived in Taiwan.
And to understand why it aligns so perfectly, we need to bring in this idea from the academic Benedict Anderson. It's called official nationalism. And it's basically the theory that a government can, from the top down, intentionally create a national story. They can rewrite history to unite a bunch of different people under one single flag.
So just put yourself in the KMT government shoes back in 1949. They're basically newcomers to Taiwan. They desperately need to legitimize their rule to create a shared story with the local people. So what do? They find the perfect piece of common ground. Hey, both of us just fought against Japan. So they took that local Taiwanese resistance and strategically wove it into their own, much grander narrative of Chinese nationalism. It was a brilliant move.
And this is why Li Yushu's book was so incredibly useful. Because it framed these Taiwanese poets as loyal Chinese patriots, it gave the state the perfect cultural ammunition for their political project. It wasn't just a history book. It was the emotional proof they needed to sell this brand new national story.
Which brings us right to our conclusion, where everything we've been talking about, the personal story of this displaced author and the political story of a new nation, they completely merge. So in the end, you can think of this book as a kind of mirror, reflecting two different things at the exact same time. On one side, it's reflecting Li Yushu's own deeply personal pain, his feelings of being a loyalist adrift, a man who lost his home. But on the other side, it's perfectly reflecting the political goals of a government trying to build a new, unified national identity on this island.
And that's what's so fascinating here.
It wasn't just one thing or the other. The real power of this book comes from this incredible, maybe even accidental, fusion. It's that exact point where one man's personal sorrow became the perfect raw material for a government's political agenda.
And all of this leaves us with a really critical question to chew on. When we read history, whose story are we really hearing? Is it the story of the people who actually lived through it? Or is it the story told by the person who chose to write it all down? A story shaped by their own loyalties, their own personal baggage, and maybe, just maybe, the political needs of their time.